The nation was torn into two, brother against brother, as the American Civil War erupted in 1861, which is a fiery clash over ideals, survival, and equality that would forever redefine the soul of the United States. In the next 12 minutes, we shall be exploring the American Civil War. Watch till the end. The period leading up to the American Civil War was marked by growing sectional tension between the North and the South, primarily over the expansion of slavery. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 attempted to preserve the balance of power by admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, while banning slavery north of the 36° 30 latitude, the Louisiana Territory. While this temporarily eased tensions, it exposed deep divisions over slavery's future. The Compromise of 1850 introduced California as a free state and allowed new territories to decide on slavery via popular sovereignty. More controversially, it strengthened the Fugitive Slave Act, which required citizens to return escaped slaves to their owners. This outraged many Northerners, who began to resist enforcement, further straining relations. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, proposed by Senator Stephen Douglas, effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise by allowing settlers in those territories to decide on slavery themselves. This led to Bleeding Kansas, a violent conflict between pro and anti-slavery settlers, symbolizing the failure of compromise and the rising intensity of sectional conflict. In 1857, the Dred Scott vs. Stanford Supreme Court decision declared that African Americans were not citizens and that Congress had no authority to ban slavery in the territories. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney's ruling invalidated the Missouri Compromise and outraged abolitionists, deepening sectional hostility. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859, though unsuccessful, aimed to incite a slave uprising. While many in the North viewed him as a martyr, the South saw it as a proof of Northern aggression and radicalism. Finally, the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, without carrying a single Southern state, signaled to the South that the federal government was now firmly opposed to the spread of slavery. His victory directly prompted the secession of South Carolina in December 1860, soon followed by 10 other Southern states. The American Civil War began in the wake of deepening sectional tensions following the election of Abraham Lincoln in November 1860. Fearing that Lincoln and the Republican Party would restrict the expansion of slavery and threaten their way of life, South Carolina seceded from the Union on December 20, 1860, becoming the first state to do so. Within 6 weeks, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed, forming the Confederate States of America in February 1861, with Jefferson Davis as their president. When Lincoln took office on March 4, 1861, he sought to reassure Southern states by stating that he had no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery. However, he firmly opposed secession, vowing to preserve the Union. The crisis escalated at Fort Sumter, a federal fort in Charleston Harbor. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces opened fire after Union forces refused to evacuate. After 34 hours of bombardment, the Union garrison surrendered. The attack galvanized the North, as a result of which Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers, prompting Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee to secede and join the Confederacy. The nation mobilized for war. By mid-1861, both the Union and Confederacy were raising armies. Prominent military figures emerged, who are Robert E. Lee, who declined Lincoln's offer to command Union forces and instead joined the Confederacy, and Ulysses S. Grant, who would later lead the Union Army to victory. The war that began as a political crisis quickly spiraled into full-scale conflict. The early years of the American Civil War revealed the conflict would be longer and more brutal than many anticipated. The first Battle of Bull Run, fought on July 21, 1861, near Manassas, Virginia, shattered any illusions of a short war. Union forces under Brigadier General Irvin McDowell clashed with Confederate troops led by Generals P.G.T. Beauregard and Joseph E. Johnston. Despite initial Union gains, a Confederate counterattack, which was famously reinforced by Thomas Stonewall Jackson, routed the Union Army, sending it retreating back to Washington. The Confederate victory boosted Southern morale and emphasized the need for better preparation on both sides. In 1862, Union General George B. McClellan launched the Peninsula Campaign, a major offensive aimed at capturing the Confederate capital, Richmond, Virginia. Although McClellan commanded a force of over 100,000 soldiers in the Army of Potomac, his cautious tactics and overestimation of enemy strength led to missed opportunities. Confederate General Robert E. Lee, newly appointed to command, repelled the Union Army during the 7 days battles in June to July 1862. The campaign ended in failure, and McClellan's leadership came under heavy criticism. The tide shifted slightly at the Battle of Antietam on September 17, 1862 in Maryland. Though tactically inconclusive, the Union claimed a strategic victory as Lee's invasion of the North was halted. With over 22,000 casualties, it remains the bloodiest single day in American military history. The battle gave President Abraham Lincoln the confidence to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, transforming the war into a fight against slavery as well as secession. Union success in the Western Theater was pivotal to the North's overall strategy in the Civil War. Under General Ulysses S. Grant, the Union captured Fort Donelson in February 1862, securing the control of the Cumberland River and marking the first major Union victory. Grant's forces then fought the bloody Battle of Shiloh in April 1862, suffering over 13,000 Union casualties, but ultimately forcing Confederate retreat in Tennessee. Control of the Mississippi River was central to the Union's strategic goals. By splitting the Confederacy and limiting their ability to move troops and supplies, the North aimed to strangle Southern resistance. This culminated in the Siege of Vicksburg, which lasted from May 18 to July 4, 1863. After 47 days of siege warfare, Grant's victory gave the Union full control of the Mississippi River, effectively cutting the Confederacy in two. The fall of Vicksburg, occurring just one day after the Union triumph at Gettysburg, marked a major turning point in the war. These efforts aligned with the broader Anaconda Plan, a strategy proposed by General Winfield Scott to blockade southern ports and control the Mississippi. Though initially criticized, the plan proved effective over time, severely restricting Confederate trade and resupply. The issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863 marked a turning point in the Civil War. While it did not free all enslaved people, but only those in Confederate-held territories, it redefined the Union's war aims by making the abolition of slavery a central goal. This shift discouraged European powers, particularly Britain and France, from recognizing or supporting the Confederacy, as public opinion in those nations was largely anti-slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation also opened the door for African Americans to serve in the Union Army. By the end of the war, around 179,000 black soldiers had enlisted, making up about 10% of the Union's military forces. Units like the 54th Massachusetts Regiment became symbols of black courage and commitment, despite facing discrimination, lower pay, and harsher conditions than white troops. Politically, the North was not unified in its support for the war. The Copperheads, or Peace Democrats, criticized Lincoln's conduct of the war and opposed emancipation. To manage internal dissent, Lincoln controversially suspended habeas corpus in certain areas, allowing for a detention of suspected Confederate sympathizers without trial. These actions sparked debate over civil liberties, but were defended by Lincoln as necessary wartime measures to preserve the Union. In July 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg marked a pivotal moment in the American Civil War. Confederate General Robert E. Lee launched a bold invasion of the North, aiming to secure a decisive victory on Union soil that might sway foreign powers and Northern public opinion. From July 1 to 3, Lee's Army of Northern Virginia clashed with the Union's Army of the Potomac, led by General George G. Meade in Pennsylvania. The battle resulted in approximately 51,000 casualties, making it the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. Lee's defeat ended his offensive campaign and forced the Confederacy into a more defensive stance, signaling the high tide of Southern hopes. Just over 4 months later, on November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address at the dedication of the National Cemetery. In just 272 words, Lincoln reframed the war as a struggle not merely for union, but for the survival of democracy and the principle of equality. He invoked the founding ideals of the nation, declaring that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. This speech gave profound moral clarity to the Union cause and helped define America's democratic identity. By 1864, the American Civil War had devolved into a brutal war of attrition, particularly under the leadership of Union General Ulysses S. Grant. Appointed as General-in-Chief in March 1864, Grant launched the Overland Campaign, a relentless series of battles aimed at wearing down Confederate forces. Key engagements included the Battle of Wilderness, which lasted from May 5 to 7, where both sides suffered around 17,500 casualties, and Cold Harbor, which lasted from June 1st to 3rd, where the Union endured approximately 7,000 casualties in a single assault, which is a stark example of the human cost of Grant's strategy. Despite the heavy losses, Grant's persistence kept pressure on Confederate General Robert E. Lee, gradually draining the South's limited manpower and resources. Simultaneously, General William Tecumseh Sherman initiated his infamous March to the Sea after capturing Atlanta in September 1864. Marching from Atlanta to Savannah, which lasted from November 15th to December 21st, Sherman's forces destroyed railways, factories, and farms, crippling the Confederate war effort. The march covered about 300 miles and inflicted roughly $100 million in damage. Beyond physical destruction, it shattered Southern morale and undermined Confederate will to continue fighting. These military successes played a pivotal role in President Abraham Lincoln's re-election in November 1864, defeating Democrat George B. McClellan. Lincoln's victory ensured the continuation of the Union war effort and solidified his commitment to abolishing slavery, as outlined in the Emancipation Proclamation. The combination of Grant's grinding offensives and Sherman's devastating campaign marked the beginning of the Confederacy's final collapse. By early 1865, the Confederacy was crumbling under Union pressure. On April 2nd, Union forces broke through Confederate lines during the siege of Petersburg, forcing General Robert E. Lee to evacuate Richmond, the Confederate capital. As they withdrew, Confederate troops set fire to military supplies, leading to a devastating blaze that destroyed much of the city. Just a week later, on April 9th, 1865, Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Grant offered generous terms, which included Confederate soldiers being able to return home with their horses and not being tried for treason. This marked the symbolic end of the war, though scattered fighting continued for weeks. Roughly 620,000 to 750,000 people died in the Civil War, making it the deadliest conflict in the American history. Tragically, just 5 days after Lee's surrender, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth on April 14, 1865 at Ford's Theater. Lincoln's death shocked the nation and cast uncertainty over the post-war Reconstruction era. While his leadership had preserved the Union, his absence left a vacuum at a critical moment of national healing, complicating efforts to reintegrate the southern states and ensure rights for newly freed African Americans. The legacy of the American Civil War echoes to the soul of the nation as an unrelenting struggle that redefined freedom, reshaped the Constitution, and left a lasting battle for equality that still shapes the American identity today. Follow for more topics.